Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I am Brian Kelly, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan. And as you can see, I'm not in my house, or I don't have wallpaper like that in my house. I'm actually at a conference. I know it seems like I've been on the road quite a bit, but this is obviously a real priority to be with you on the Small Business Briefing. And so coming to you from Northern Michigan today.
Hi, everybody. Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications. Welcome to the show. And I'd like to say thank you to our sponsor, Marana Group. They are located in Kalamazoo. So Brian, we've kind of moved away from having to talk about COVID-related issues on the briefing, but there is an effort to clean up some laws that were put into place as COVID response a few years ago.
Yeah, for the alumni club that's been part of this briefing since the beginning, you'll remember that in 2020 there were some laws passed, and laws are permanent things unless you put an expiration date in them or repeal those laws. And there were some COVID era requirements on employers that technically still exist today in the law, and we're seeing those now a process go through the Senate, the state Senate, in order to get those repealed. Of course, they'll have to go through the House and gain the governor's signature as well. The one that we're chiefly or primarily most concerned about are the what at the time were employee protections. Those who stayed home from work after COVID exposure could not be fired. And so in this case, in this day and age with vaccines and previous infections and so forth, a COVID exposure but no positive COVID test, no symptoms, the CDC wouldn't even recommend that you stay quarantined for 14 days, and yet an employee could still technically choose to do that, and an employer could not take disciplinary action. So that's just an example. There are some other issues in that law, that 2020 law that was passed, but hopefully it will go through the process without too much drama.
All right. So last week, Launch Michigan released some framework about education reform in Michigan. And we're actually going to have a special guest on Thursday to talk more about this. But could you just give a brief intro and let people know what Launch Michigan is and maybe preview that framework ahead of Thursday's show?
Yeah, Launch Michigan is an organization, coalition really, between what I'll call strange bedfellows, so groups that don't normally work together, with an eye toward improving the education system, recognizing that our system here in Michigan has been falling behind, and our nation has been falling behind the rest of the world. So not only are we falling behind among other states, our country is falling behind other countries, and so making improvements, making changes is important in order to prepare people, to prepare our kids of the future for the requirements of a 21st century increasingly global economy. And so this effort includes labor and management and business, philanthropy, communities, and families that are really trying to work together, really hard work, but work together to make changes. And there was a report that was released. You may have saw some media on it. SBAM, with my predecessor, Rob Fowler, was one of the founding members of Launch Michigan, this education coalition. And Jeff Donofrio, who is the new-ish CEO of the Business Leaders for Michigan, which represents mostly, all members of their organization are bigger businesses. Of course, we're small business. We try to work together on as many things as we can. This is one of those things. So we're going to have Jeff come on Thursday, and we're going to talk in a little more detail about what this framework for education reform in the future looks like, why it's so important. This has been kind of a slow-moving crisis, and it's moved slow enough to where it's not really treated like the crisis that it is. But unfortunately, it has, and employers are feeling it across the board, that we've got such huge workforce challenges in front of us, and at its very base, the education system is one of the things that is going to have to change in order for us to make forward progress. So we'll have an in-depth discussion on Thursday. with Jeff Donofrio and the Business Leaders for Michigan and talk about some of the work that we're doing together to try to push our system toward real change in the education world.
Yeah, we definitely look forward to having Jeff on the show later this week. Let's shift gears a little bit. So Governor Whitmer has been doing a lot of national media lately, and there's some interesting insights that we might be able to glean based on her comments regarding re-election and future ambitions.
Yeah, this was kind of interesting where governors that have a national profile, when they do national media, they're always going to try to pull out a little bit, what are your future intentions? You have ambition at the national level. And of course, Governor Whitmer was on the short list for vice president for Joe Biden back a few years ago. And so there were two questions that were asked that caught my attention. I thought I would just to share with you. In one of her national interviews was covered in local media because it was so interesting. The first thing was, she was asked the question, should Joe Biden run again in 2024? There's rampant speculation that he won't be running again in 2024. Of course, he can't say that, even if he is not planning on running again, be treated like a lame duck this early in his term. So regardless of what he says, there's speculation rampant that he won't. And so when Governor Whitmer was asked, should Joe Biden run again in 2024, she said, I'm not going to weigh in on whether he should run. If he does run, he'll have my support. That's how she answered the question. And so not to just say yes was kind of a big deal, but it begged another question. The follow-up question was, would you rule out your own run for president in 2024? And she said, it's flattering for people to even ask. And she was pressed on the issue. She said she is focused on Michigan and getting the economy back on track and people back to work. So in other words, she didn't say no, and that she doesn't have that ambition or isn't considering that. Again, when you're running for one office, it's very awkward to talk about what comes afterward. But I thought it provided some provided some insight that for a governor of the same party to not be willing to just say, yes, I think he should run, I think really does kind of play into the narrative that maybe for the first time in a very, very long time, we'll have a sitting president not running for re-election when eligible. And then the second question, of course, she's got a re-election to get through before getting to that. But when you're on a VP shortlist, you're naturally going to be talked about for the top office when that comes up. And so when pushed on that particular question, she gave the classic answer of, I'm focused on this now, as opposed to saying yes or no to it. I do expect that you'll increasingly see Governor Whitmer as part of the national conversation.
The last time you speculated on whether or not Joe Biden might run for re-election, the White House press secretary issued a tweet just several hours later saying he was. So we'll have to monitor Twitter later and see if they're watching today.
Oh yeah, I'm quite sure that the White House follows this briefing very closely.
Clearly. All right, let's talk about the news that came out last week about Kellogg. That they have now split into 3 different divisions, moving some out of Michigan even. So what really led to that decision?
Yeah, and so Battle Creek has been the home of Kellogg going back to when it was a new and small company, and it grew into this global empire. Now but it's changed a lot. It was born out of cereal and breakfast food, but the division of Kellogg that makes snack food has eclipsed cereal by a lot. So it's about 80% of the business. And Kellogg recently decided to split up. There are technically 3 different divisions, 2 kind of main parts though, which the cereal division, which is about 20% of the overall business. And that will stay in Battle Creek. The cereal and the other smaller components will stay there. The big part of the business, 80% of the business, is the snack food lines, or are the snack food lines of business, and that will be moving. That headquarters will be moving to Chicago, And when asked about it in the interviews, they said, first of all, they don't think that cereal, which is kind of like a smaller and shrinking market overall, that it should be in a position where it has to compete with resources with the snack business, which is kind of exploding. Well, so they're separating them out, and then the one where the growth potential is, the one that has the bigger and the better future, moving to Chicago. And they cited talent, that there's a lot of food industry talent in Chicago, and getting at all the different components and the people that they need, that was a market that was better suited for that type of growth. Just for the purposes of illustration, so you can get a sense, you've got the cereal part of the business. There are other breakfast foods, but also snacks that go in this part that's moving out of Michigan. Cheez-It, for example, Eggo, Pop-Tarts, RX Bar, Pringles. So if you think about how big those brands are, and that's the part that's moving out. So it's a pretty big hit. I don't expect that it's going to get the same type of attention as say, like Ford making the bigger investments in Kentucky and Tennessee. However, I will say that this is a big challenge, or big hit to the Battle Creek market. It's quite an important part of that local economy. And while on a statewide basis, you might not feel it the same way as you would on another for other bigger businesses that in a company town like Battle Creek, I think this is going to make their future a lot more complicated.
Let's talk about a housing package that SBAM supported and has now been stopped due to some school interest groups. So remind us what that package was and why it's now stalled.
We started talking about this and working on and with other business groups and local communities on moving a package that essentially created a clearer avenue and more kind of sustainable business model for low and moderate income housing, recognizing shortages all across the state. And so there was a package that was moving through. One element is it captures part of the property tax in order to provide the incentive and essentially to make the economics around affordable housing work a little bit better. It sailed through the Senate. When it got into the House, though, some of the school interest groups that rely on property taxes somewhat. Most school budgets are based on state revenues and especially like the per pupil allotment, which comes from the sales tax. But schools have millages, ISDs have millages. Anyway, the school interest groups, including the unions, had really said, no, it's going to it has a potential of capturing future property tax revenue growth and using it for this purpose that should go to our schools. So while that is, if you look kind of in a narrow span, that's true. However, the amount of money that schools get from per pupil allotment dwarfs the amount that they get from property taxes. So I think it was kind of short-sighted to say that we're not going to fix the housing problem, which, low and moderate income housing is more likely to be used by younger people, which are more likely to have children, which are more likely to have children in local schools. I think that it was short-sighted. So it's stalled right now in the House. It's certainly not going to pass before there'll be a period of summer break, if you will, where it's re-election year. You got all these primaries coming up. The legislature is likely to pass a budget this week, at least the main kind of operating budget for the state, and then they'll be gone for a while. Certainly will not be revived before then, and then maybe this fall it can come back up for some negotiations. But it's one of those issues where it's not traditionally seen as a business issue, the housing shortage, but it's popped up in many areas of our state now as a major inhibiting factor to overall growth of the community and finding and maintaining an adequate workforce.
All right, it is now time for Data Monday. So as regular viewers will know, we've kind of shifted gears from talking about COVID numbers to economic numbers.
Yeah, let's take a look here at our Data Monday for today. And there's got kind of an eclectic group here, but I wanted to start with oil and petroleum. I thought this was really quite interesting. First is we have the strategic petroleum reserve that the United States has. You might remember that the Biden administration said earlier this year to help ease prices, we're going to start using the oil reserve. You remember we said on this program that's not going to make that big of a difference, if any. In fact, the price has risen since then. But look at the amount of reserves that the U.S. has on hand. This would be for during times of war, for example, and there might be disruptions in oil supply. To have this reserve on hand so that we can, in the short term, continue to operate. Well, it's gotten down now as low as it's been in the last 40 years. I mean, it's just what a drop off. And unfortunately, it didn't really end up making a meaningful difference in the price. Now, looking at the gasoline in another way, we see that the daily price, the average price going up here through, and if you added a few more weeks onto this graph, you'd see it even higher. But but as you see this number going up, this blue and the orange, this blue line here is looking at the percentage of spending that of people on gasoline. And what this tells me is that people have started to change their behavior. In other words, as you see the amount spent on gasoline not moving up as fast as the overall price, that means that people have had to start changing their behavior in terms of their utilization and consumption. That's kind of a big deal when it comes to supply and demand in commodities. And then also, third slide and last slide on gas and oil, you'll see that the national average has kind of leveled off. So it got above $5, but has kind of leveled off. But take a look at these crude futures, and seeing the futures starting to fall. Maybe that's an indication. First news that I've seen that maybe we've hit a point where we could see things at least stabilize or potentially come down a little bit. Not a prediction, just saying this. It's the first indication that I've seen that there are some market expectations, perhaps. I wanted to share though this City Economic Surprise Index, and this is an index you don't really hear much about, but here's what it gets at. So you get all these forecasts for economic information. Now, when the actual numbers come out, are they better? That would be better than expected. That'd be above the zero. Are they worse than expected? It would be below the zero. Not surprisingly, you see a lot of these economic projections are continually coming out worse than expected. And that's why you see this kind of shock into the marketplace where things will kind of drop quickly, is because something will come out, numbers will come out, and it won't look as good as what we thought it was going to look. And you have to go way back to the height, or the depths, I should say, of the pandemic before you saw things coming in, essentially these surprises coming in as low as they are right now. We're also seeing the private equity market significantly drop off. I think there are a couple of different factors on this. First is that there's kind of a wait and see approach. So there was a kind of a buying spree that was happening in the private equity market, and it was pretty consistent. You see some ups and downs through the months over the last 18 months or so, but it was pretty high. But it's fallen off as you've seen the economic outlook fall off. You see that these numbers are starting to, or not starting to, they have completely fallen off. So I think there is somewhat of a wait and see, perhaps a pent up demand that you'll see in the private equity market in terms of going out there and making acquisitions and new deals. But I think there's another factor to this too, which is that the source of money is taking a hit as well when you consider the amount of equity reduction. In other words, the stock market has really entered a bear market, and so the capital that is just kind of out there is limited compared to what it was before. So I have here the U.S. industrial production manufacturing durables, and I show this, in Michigan, obviously manufacturing is pretty big. And you do see this this increase here, which tells me that all these supply chain struggles that we've been having, which has been holding it down, huge demand, but the activity has been depressed by the supply chain issues, that some of those are starting to get solved. And so you see that production going up. I will say, I don't have the slide here, but just this morning I saw out of the Dallas Federal Reserve that as they look at kind of the future demand for some of these durables, they see it softening, including in short-term months. So there's pent-up demand. So they have to work through that pent-up demand. But in terms of new demand being created, I think there's some reason to temper our expectations there somewhat. Also wanted to point to interest rates. So 30-year homeowner rates, so 30-year mortgage, you see that that's gone up a lot. It was back in the previous recession was the last time we saw interest rates at this level, so 5.81%, and in terms of the average, and not unexpected, right? We expected, as the Federal Reserve increased interest rates, that this would happen. I thought this was pretty interesting, though, that the utilization, the percentage of contracts that are that have moved to adjustable rate mortgages has gone up quite a bit. And so that what this would say is that people don't want to lock in at that rate for the next 30 years. They'd rather go with an adjustable rate mortgage. And so it's just yet another kind of market reaction. And I find this stuff really, really interesting, that when something changes out there, consumers will change behavior. And that's what I would say is the theme of our of Data Monday today, is that the consumers are changing behavior based on what's happening out there in the marketplace. The final slide here is just to look at the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, and the Russell 2000 index. And what this is showing is, this isn't like the value of the index, but this is showing is the percent of those 500 companies here in the S&P 500, for example, the percentage of them that are above their 200-day moving average, and it's only 20%. On the Russell 2000, only 13%. What this is saying is that in the Russell 2000 index, those 2,000 companies are only 87% are trading below their 200-day average. So just like pretty much across the board, almost every sector, almost every company is trading well below their averages. We did see last week a little bit of a bounce back. I think overall the S&P 500 was up 6.5% last week. It was the first time in a while that we have seen an up week. I think we had 3 weeks in a row of significant decline, and entered that bear market status. But now we're seeing last week we saw a little bit of a reprieve from that, but I wouldn't take too much comfort in it. It's just a little, there's some bargain hunting that was happening, some sense that maybe we've hit the bottom or bottomed out a little bit, but overall I would say more warning signs out there than relief at this point, but trying to lace in where we can find it, and where it gives some credible insight, areas where maybe there's a bit of a bright spot, and who knows whether this is going to be something that we're struggling with in terms of a soft economy for a year or two like we had last time, or if it's the sort of thing that we really can work through in a matter of 6 months or so. I don't think there's There are many who believe that this is that these struggles that we're having today with getting interest rates under control and softening economy because of the monetary policies and overall struggles with the efficiencies. There are too many people that think that that's going to be something that we work through in a matter of just a few months. But whether we're talking about 6 months, 9 months, 12, 24 months, I think that's really the biggest question here. And we'll stay on top of it. And that's what Data Monday going forward is all about.
All right, well, thank you, Brian. Just a final reminder to our viewers in Ann Arbor and Kalamazoo. We have 2 owner-to-owner events this week. That's when you can come connect with other small business owners in your area. We will be in Ann Arbor on Wednesday and Kalamazoo on Thursday. And then we'll see you back here Thursday at 3 o'clock.
Thanks, everybody. See you on Thursday.